Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going to be tackling the world of traumatic memory.
Oh, it's fascinating stuff.
It is, it's really complex, and you've given me this stack of sources about how trauma affects us mentally, physically, and even emotionally.
Yeah, the research is just exploding right now. There's so much we're learning about how the mind and body kind of process or sometimes don't process trauma.
Right, and it seems like these sources are all kind of pointing to the idea that traumatic memory, it's different.
It really is.
It's not like remembering, what you had for breakfast this morning.
No, it's not an everyday memory.
It's more like these
They're like these.
shattered pieces,
Yes.
like a broken mirror,
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
almost.
It's like fragmented
Yeah,
sensations and emotions and even physical reactions, but it's not a coherent narrative.
you can't tell the story.
It's not a story.
Right, and that makes it so much harder to deal with, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's not linear.
It's not something you can just, go back and
Makes sense of.
make sense of. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the sources uses this phrase that I love, but it's also so chilling.
Oh, yeah.
They talk about these soundless apparitions,
Hmm.
which I think is such a powerful way to describe these fragmented memories.
It really is, because they can come out of nowhere.
They do.
Just these sudden intrusions, and it's like, where did that come from?
And you can't trace it back
Exactly.
to a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah, and that lack of context can just be incredibly overwhelming.
And it seems like our understanding of this impact has really changed over time.
It has.
I mean, the sources talk about how trauma has been, studied and researched and then kind of fallen out of favor.
It's like we keep rediscovering it.
We do.
Like every few decades, it comes back into the forefront.
Yeah, and there was this whole period where the idea of repressed memories became like
Oh, huge
a
debate.
huge thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the current thinking on that? Have we reached a better understanding of repressed memories?
Well, complete amnesia, where you block out an entire event,
Yeah.
that's actually pretty rare.
Okay.
But what the research does suggest is that traumatic memories, they're often stored differently.
So they're not accessed as easily?
Exactly. They're not, filed away like your everyday memories.
So they kind of lurk beneath the surface
They can, yeah.
and can be triggered by who knows what.
Absolutely. And that's why, when we talk about trauma, it's so important to be sensitive.
Right.
You don't want to force someone to relive those experiences before they're ready.
So if these memories are so hard to access, how do people begin to heal?
Well, that's where these sources get really interesting, because they explore all these different therapeutic approaches.
Right.
And they take into account, the unique nature of traumatic memory.
Yeah.
And one that really stands out is EMDR.
EMDR, I've heard of that.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
It sounds a little, too simple.
Yeah, I know a lot of people think that.
Like you're just moving your eyes back and forth.
Right, but there's actually a lot more to it.
Okay.
So it involves this thing called bilateral stimulation, and that can be eye movements,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also be, tapping or sounds.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that this stimulation, it actually helps the brain process those traumatic memories more effectively.
So it's not about erasing the memory?
No, it's not about forgetting.
Okay.
It's about changing how it's stored and how you relate to it.
So it's still there, but...
It's still there, but it doesn't have the same hold over you.
Okay.
It's like, imagine a tangled knot of yarn.
Okay.
EMDR is kind of like gently working through those tangles, allowing the yarn to flow freely again.
I like that.
Yeah.
So it's integrated, but it's not causing the same level of distress.
Exactly.
Now, I'm noticing a theme here in these sources, like a shift from just talk therapy to incorporating the body more.
Oh, absolutely.
And one source in particular talks about yoga being so beneficial for trauma survivors.
Yeah, yoga is amazing because it works on so many levels.
How so?
Well, the physical postures
Yeah.
combined with the breath work, it helps release tension and calm the nervous system.
Uh-huh.
But it's also about cultivating body awareness.
Okay.
Learning to tune in to those subtle sensations, the body's signals.
Like listening to your body.
Exactly.
Okay.
Instead of ignoring it.
Right.
Yeah, and that connection, that mind-body connection, often gets severed by trauma.
So it's about reclaiming that.
Absolutely.
So it's not just relaxation.
No.
It's more profound than that.
It's about reclaiming that sense of safety and control in your own body.
It's almost like reclaiming ownership.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And that makes me think back to that idea of self-leadership that we touched on earlier.
Right, with the IFS model.
Yeah, where we have these different parts of ourselves.
Those internal characters.
Yeah, which is a fascinating idea.
It is.
But it also seems like a lot to handle.
Well, it can be, but that's where the self-leadership comes in, especially with trauma. It's about learning to navigate those parts with compassion.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by all these different voices.
Yeah, instead of feeling fragmented,
Right.
you're aiming for more integration, more harmony.
Okay.
And that's where that idea of becoming a compassionate leader comes in.
So like you're leading those parts.
Exactly. You're the wise guide.
Okay.
You acknowledge their fears, validate their concerns, and you guide them towards a more peaceful and integrated state.
Which sounds like a lot of inner work.
It is, but that's where therapies like IFS can be so helpful.
And I imagine as you get better at kind of navigating that internal world, it makes it easier to navigate the external world.
You're absolutely right.
The things that might have been triggers before.
They don't have the same power over you.
Yeah.
You've developed that resilience, that inner strength.
Okay, now I want to circle back to language.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about how words can be limited
Yes.
when it comes to expressing the depths of trauma.
Right. Sometimes words just don't feel adequate.
But at the same time, language can be a powerful tool
Absolutely.
for healing.
It can be. It can be.
So how do we reconcile that?
Well, I think it's about finding the right words.
Oh,
You
yeah?
know, the words that resonate for you.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes it's not even about the words themselves.
It's about the expression.
It's about the expression. Yeah, finding those alternative forms.
Right.
Art or music or movement.
So you don't always have to talk about the trauma?
No, sometimes it's about finding ways to release it, to express it, to transform it.
So it's not always about telling the story.
Right.
It's about finding other ways to
process it, to heal.
heal, yeah.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another interesting approach that these sources mention, which is internal family systems, or IFS.
Oh, IFS is fascinating.
Okay, tell me more.
So imagine your mind is like a house with different rooms.
Okay.
Each room represents a different part of yourself,
Uh-huh.
each with its own perspective, its own feelings.
So it's like having these different characters
Yes, exactly.
living inside your head.
They're all part of you.
Okay.
And they develop in response to your experiences, especially traumatic ones.
But how do you actually work with these different parts?
So the goal of IFS therapy is to get to know these parts,
Okay.
understand their motivations, their needs,
Yeah.
and to integrate them into a more harmonious whole.
It sounds like internal negotiation.
It is, in a way.
Wow.
It's about creating internal dialogue
Okay.
instead of fighting against yourself.
It sounds like it takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does, and that's where that self-leadership aspect comes in.
Right.
Through IFS, you learn to access your core self,
Right.
the part of you that's inherently wise, compassionate,
Uh,
and capable of leading these different parts towards healing.
like you're the conductor
Yeah, like,
of your internal orchestra.
I love that, yeah.
So it's not about silencing those difficult parts.
No, it's about understanding them
Yeah.
and integrating them into a more whole, more resilient sense of self.
Okay, this has been so insightful.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, I have this one question that keeps coming back to me.
Okay.
We're talking about all these therapies for individuals,
Mm-hmm.
but what about on a societal level?
Oh, that's a huge question.
What can we do to prevent trauma in the first place?
Well, that's something these sources touch upon as well.
Okay.
It's not enough to just focus on individual healing.
Right.
We have to acknowledge those systemic issues.
Right, those root causes.
Poverty, violence, discrimination.
Yeah.
All of these things create the conditions for trauma.
It's like trying to heal a wound
Right.
without addressing the infection.
Exactly. You have to treat both.
The symptoms and the root causes.
Symptoms and the root causes. Absolutely.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
It is. It's about advocating for social justice,
Yeah.
promoting trauma-informed policies,
Uh-huh.
creating communities that are truly safe.
And that's a big task.
It is a big task.
But it's essential
Absolutely.
because trauma doesn't just affect individuals.
It affects everyone.
It ripples outward.
It ripples outward. It impacts families, communities, generations.
And it sounds like these sources are really pushing for us to think more collectively.
We have to.
Yeah.
We can't ignore these systemic issues.
We have to be more trauma-informed as a society.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
But I'm really eager to dive deeper into these specific therapies and their impact.
Yeah, let's get into the details.
So I think we should take a quick break and then come back and really unpack these fascinating insights.
Sounds good to me.
All right, we'll be right back.
Looking forward to it. So before the break, we were talking about psychomotor therapy and that focus on the body.
Yeah, like the body really holds on to the trauma.
It does. It's not just in your head, it gets into your nervous system, like it's wired into your being.
And we see it in those physical symptoms.
Exactly, like the racing heart, muscle tension, always feeling on edge.
Right, like your body's stuck in that fight or flight.
Exactly, even when there's no danger.
So how do we unravel that?
Well, you mentioned yoga earlier.
Right, yoga.
And it's so powerful because it works on multiple levels.
How so?
Well, the physical postures and the breathing help release that tension and calm the nervous system down.
Okay.
But it's more than just the poses.
Right.
It's about cultivating that body awareness.
Yeah.
Tuning into those subtle sensations.
You learn to listen to your body.
Exactly, instead of ignoring it.
Which is what we tend to do with trauma.
We do. We try to shut it out.
And that's why yoga can be so powerful.
It's about reclaiming that mind-body connection.
Okay.
And the beauty is you don't have to be super flexible or anything.
Yeah, anyone can do it.
Exactly. Even gentle movements and simple breathing exercises can make a huge difference.
So it's about finding what feels safe for you.
Right. And as you become more aware of your body, you start to feel like you have more control.
Okay.
And that can be incredibly empowering for trauma survivors.
Because they often feel so powerless.
Exactly. So it's about taking back that power.
I like that, taking back the power.
Yeah, and it all ties back to that self-leadership we were discussing.
Right, with the IFS.
Yeah, remember those different parts?
Like all those characters in your head.
Exactly. And self-leadership with trauma is about learning to work with those parts.
So instead of feeling like you're falling apart,
You're becoming more integrating.
right, more whole.
Exactly. And you become this compassionate leader.
So you're leading those parts.
You're guiding them,
Okay.
acknowledging their fears, validating their concerns.
So it's like inner teamwork,
It is. It's about creating that internal harmony.
which I imagine takes a lot of work.
It does, but that's where IFS therapy can be so beneficial.
And as you get better at managing that inner world, it must make the outer world easier too.
Absolutely. You become more resilient, more confident.
Yeah, like those triggers don't have the same power over you.
Exactly. You're not
Yeah.
so easily thrown off balance.
And speaking of balance, I want to circle back to language.
Okay.
Because we were saying how words can be limiting when it comes to trauma.
Right. Sometimes you just can't put it into words.
But words can also be incredibly healing.
They can.
So how do we balance those two things?
I think it's about finding the language that works for you, the words that resonate.
And sometimes it's not even about words.
Right. It's about finding other ways to express what you're feeling.
So it's not always about telling the story.
No, sometimes it's about finding ways to release it, to transform it.
Okay, so it's not always about talking about the trauma.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about moving through it, feeling it in your body.
That makes me think of another therapy mentioned in these sources, internal family systems.
Oh, IFS is fascinating.
It is. Tell me more.
So think of your mind like a house with different rooms,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
and each room is a different part of yourself.
Okay, so each room has like its own personality.
Exactly. Its own perspective, its own feelings.
It's like having these different characters living in your head.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they're all part of you.
Okay.
And they develop based on your experiences, especially the traumatic ones.
So how do you actually work with these different parts?
Well, the goal of IFS therapy is to get to know these parts,
Okay.
understand what they need, what motivates them,
Yeah.
and then try to integrate them into a more harmonious whole.
That sounds challenging.
It can be. It's like internal negotiation.
Wow.
It's about creating a dialogue within yourself.
Instead of feeling like you're at war with yourself.
Exactly. It's about finding peace within.
Which sounds like it takes a lot of self-awareness.
It does, and that's
Yeah.
where the self-leadership comes in.
Okay.
So through IFS, you learn to access your core self.
Right, that wise part of you.
Exactly, the compassionate part that can guide the other parts towards healing.
Like you're the conductor of the orchestra.
I love that analogy.
So it's not about silencing those difficult parts of ourselves.
No, it's about understanding them
Yeah.
and integrating them into a more whole, more resilient you.
That's powerful.
It is. It's about recognizing that all parts of you are valid.
And that they all have something to contribute.
Exactly. Even the parts that seem negative or scary.
They're trying to protect you in some way.
Exactly. They're trying to help you survive.
Okay, this has been so eye-opening.
It is fascinating stuff.
But I keep coming back to this question of what can we do on a societal level
The big picture.
to prevent trauma in the first place?
Right, because individual healing is important,
Yeah,
but we can't ignore the systems that contribute to trauma.
like the root causes we were talking about.
Exactly. Poverty, racism, violence.
All of those things.
They create the conditions for trauma to flourish.
It's like we're trying to heal a wound,
Right.
but we're not addressing the infection,
Exactly. We have to treat both.
the symptoms, and the root causes.
Absolutely. It's a multi-pronged approach.
So it's about advocating for social justice,
Yes.
promoting trauma-informed policies, creating communities that are truly safe and supportive.
It's a big task.
It is, but it's essential.
It is. We can't just focus on individual healing.
Right. We have to address those systemic issues.
Absolutely. And that's where our collective responsibility comes in.
Because trauma doesn't just affect individuals.
It affects everyone.
It ripples outward.
It impacts families, communities, even future generations.
This has been such a powerful conversation.
It has.
But I'm really eager to dive even deeper into these specific therapies.
Let's get into the details.
So let's take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll explore some of the more creative and expressive approaches to healing.
Sounds good to me. I'm excited to continue our journey.
So welcome back to our deep dive into traumatic memory. And we were just talking about healing, not just from the past, but moving forward. And I think that leads us perfectly to these more creative therapies.
Yeah, absolutely.
These sources talk about. And one that really jumped out at me was theater therapy.
Oh, interesting.
And it seems almost, I don't know, counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Like using theater to process trauma.
It might seem that way, but that's kind of the beauty of it.
Okay.
It provides this really safe and structured way to explore those tough emotions.
Okay.
But through this creative lens, it's not about putting on a big show or anything.
Right.
It's about using those tools like improvisation and role-playing to actually process the trauma.
So the stage becomes like a metaphor.
Yeah, for life.
Allowing you to try on different roles.
Exactly. And one thing that makes theater therapy so unique is that emphasis on the body.
Right. Getting out of your head.
It's not just talking about it, it's feeling it in your body.
Yeah.
Expressing it through movement and your voice.
And I imagine that the act of creating something new can be really healing.
Oh, absolutely.
You're taking these shattered pieces and making something beautiful.
You're taking those painful experiences and you're transforming them into something meaningful.
Yeah, and the fact that it's collaborative.
Oh, that's so important.
You're doing this with other people.
Yeah, it creates this sense of connection and support.
Yeah. It reminds you that you're not alone.
Exactly. Trauma can be so isolating, and theater therapy provides that sense of community.
One thing I noticed was how this therapy uses ritual.
Oh, rituals are so powerful.
Yeah, they give a structure and meaning.
Right, like think about those ancient Greek tragedies or even modern-day rituals.
Like weddings and funerals.
Exactly. They provide a container for big emotions, help us make sense of things.
And theater therapy kind of taps into that.
It does. It uses those structured exercises to help people create their own healing rituals.
So it's not just reliving the trauma.
No, it's about transforming it
Yeah.
through this ritualistic process.
Okay, so you're taking back your story.
You're reclaiming your narrative.
And you're giving it this new meaning.
Exactly. You become the author of your own life.
I love that.
You're not defined by the trauma anymore.
And we've seen throughout this deep dive, there are so many paths to healing.
So many different approaches.
But one thing that keeps coming up for me is that healing isn't just an individual responsibility.
Right. It's societal, too.
Yeah, we can't ignore the systems that contribute to this.
We can't.
Poverty, racism, violence.
They all create the conditions for trauma.
It's like trying to heal a wound without cleaning it.
Yeah, you have to address the infection.
So we have to treat the symptoms and the root causes.
Absolutely. It has to be a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah. And that means advocating for social justice and trauma-informed policies.
Yeah.
Creating communities that are actually safe and supportive.
It's a big task, but it's so important.
Because trauma doesn't just impact individuals.
It ripples outward. It affects families, communities, future generations.
We've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
And learned so much about trauma.
And the resilience of the human spirit.
Yes, and all the different ways that we can heal.
It's incredible.
But before we wrap up, is there anything else that you really want our listener to take away from all this?
We talked about all these different therapies, but the most important thing is hope. These sources show us that healing is possible no matter how deep the wounds.
That's so important to remember.
The brain and body are capable of amazing transformation, and there's help out there.
You're not alone in this.
Exactly.
And healing is a journey.
It is. It's not always linear.
There will be setbacks.
Absolutely.
But the important thing is to keep moving forward.
One step at a time.
This has been such a rich and inspiring exploration of traumatic memory. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation.
And to our listener, We hope this deep dive has given you new insights and a renewed sense of hope.
Yes, keep learning and keep believing in the power of transformation.
Thank you for joining us.